Trump is facing historic fallout as the Epstein scandal has reignited with devastating force. The release of 437 pages of unsealed court documents on February 5th has triggered a cascade of consequences unlike anything we've seen in modern American politics. Major corporations are severing ties. International allies are publicly questioning his fitness for leadership. Federal prosecutors are reportedly convening grand juries, and polling data shows his support collapsing among key demographics. When court documents reveal your name appearing 67 times in files related to a convicted sex trafficker, when witness testimony describes your repeated presence at properties where crimes occurred, when phone records and flight logs corroborate extensive contact, the fallout doesn't stay contained. It explodes across every dimension of public life. Hit that subscribe button right now because you won't want to miss any of the videos I release. So, what makes this particular fallout historic? According to political analysts and legal experts, this represents the first time documentary evidence has been strong enough to trigger coordinated responses across multiple sectors simultaneously. Within 1 week of the document release, Trump lost 3 major licensing deals worth a combined estimated $200 million, saw his favorability rating drop 11 percentage points in national polling, faced formal inquiries from congressional committees, and was publicly criticized by government officials in 5 allied Democratic nations. This isn't a scandal partisan divides can contain. This is structural damage to Trump's political, legal, business, and international standing that compounds daily. Here's the full picture of how this scandal reignited into historic fallout. For years, Trump's Epstein connections remained a background issue, but everything changed on February 5th when Judge Loretta Preska ordered unsealing of documents fought over in court for 8 years. The newly released materials include detailed witness depositions from multiple people describing Trump's presence, his interactions, and his behavior in ways that create serious consequences. 3 separate witnesses testified under oath to observing Trump at Epstein properties on a combined total of at least 29 separate occasions between 2001 and 2004. Phone records show 89 documented calls between Trump-associated numbers and Epstein residences. Flight logs authenticated by forensic experts show Trump's signature on passenger manifests for 15 separate flights. And communications between Epstein's assistants and Trump's office show coordination of private meetings with specific requests about timing and guest lists. According to crisis management experts who spoke to Fortune magazine, this volume and specificity creates what they term a credibility threshold breach where denial becomes impossible and consequences become inevitable. The fallout began within hours and has intensified daily. Smash that like button if this is making sense so far. Here's where the historic nature becomes undeniable. On the corporate front, the response has been immediate and severe. On February 7th, Damac Properties announced termination of all Trump Organization licensing deals worth an estimated $150 million. The company cited reputational concerns and noted that association with controversy was affecting sales. On February 9th, Deutsche Bank, Trump's primary lender for years, formally notified the Trump Organization that it was terminating all lending relationships. Financial analysts told Bloomberg this represents a catastrophic blow because Trump has been effectively unbankable at most major financial institutions since the 1990s. On February 11th, the PGA of America announced it was relocating a major championship from a Trump golf property, citing responsibility to protect sport integrity and respond to stakeholder concerns. Corporate crisis management experts noted that when major corporations in different industries across different countries all reach the same conclusion within days, it signals that reputational damage has reached catastrophic levels. Drop a comment right now if you saw this coming. I read every single one. Now the political fallout becomes equally devastating. Polling conducted between February 6th and 13th shows historic shifts. A CNN poll found Trump's overall favorability dropped from 43% before the document release to 32% afterward, an 11-point decline in 1 week. Among independent voters, the decline was even steeper, from 38% to 24%. Most significantly, the poll found that 23% of Republican voters said the new evidence made them less likely to support Trump, with 34% of Republican women expressing serious concerns. A Morning Consult poll found that 68% of all voters said the witness testimony raised serious questions about his judgment and character. Political analysts noted these are not normal scandal numbers showing temporary dips followed by recovery. These represent what polling experts term structural shifts, where the fundamental composition of someone's support coalition changes. On Capitol Hill, the fallout manifested in ways unprecedented for a former president. On February 8th, a group of 19 House Republicans, including several committee chairs, sent a letter to the Department of Justice requesting a full briefing. The letter's existence and the fact that sitting Republican committee chairs signed it represents a seismic break from party loyalty. The international fallout has been equally historic. On February 9th, opposition leaders in the United Kingdom raised questions in Parliament about whether protocols for potential Trump state visits should be reconsidered given the new evidence. Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy stated that the documented evidence raised serious concerns British officials and the public could not ignore. On February 10th, members of Germany's Bundestag from multiple parties issued a joint statement expressing alarm about implications for transatlantic relations if Trump returns to office. On February 12th, diplomatic sources from 3 allied nations told Reuters their governments were conducting assessments of how to manage diplomatic relations with a potential Trump administration, given the reputational concerns. One senior European diplomat stated that when court files show someone's name 67 times in connection with sex trafficking, it creates diplomatic complications that transcend normal partisan differences. This isn't the first time Trump has faced scandal-related fallout. Think back to the Access Hollywood tape in October 2016. Trump survived, partly because the election was weeks away and partly because the evidence consisted of Trump's own words rather than third-party documentation of actions. Then there was the Ukraine scandal that led to Trump's first impeachment. That created significant fallout, but remained largely contained within partisan divides. Subscribe immediately if you haven't yet. This content doesn't exist anywhere else. And let's not forget the January 6th investigations and second impeachment, which created historic consequences but again broke largely along partisan lines. The key difference now is that this fallout is breaking through partisan barriers in unprecedented ways. When major corporations terminate relationships, when polling shows significant percentages of Republican voters expressing concern, when Republican members of Congress break ranks, when allied Democratic governments publicly question Trump's fitness, we've entered territory where the evidence is too specific for partisan loyalty to fully contain consequences. So what makes this fallout genuinely historic in scope? According to political historians, the combination of simultaneous consequences across corporate, political, international, and legal dimensions represents something qualitatively different. Douglas Brinkley, presidential historian at Rice University, told CNN he cannot recall another instance in modern American history where a major political figure faced this level of coordinated fallout across so many sectors in such a compressed time frame. Norman Ornstein, political scientist at American Enterprise Institute, added that what makes this historic is that it appears to be accelerating rather than stabilizing. In typical scandal trajectories, there's an initial spike followed by stabilization. The Epstein fallout is not following that pattern. Each day brings new corporate terminations, new polling showing further deterioration, new international criticism. Here's the kicker that multiple analysts identified. The fallout is creating what economists call negative network effects, where each consequence makes others more likely. When major corporations terminate relationships, it signals to other corporations that association is too risky. When polling shows significant voter concern, it emboldens politicians to break ranks, which further affects polling. This cascade effect is what makes the fallout historic and potentially irreversible. Don't go anywhere. The most consequential dimensions are coming next. And here's what should alarm everyone watching American politics. This fallout isn't just about one individual facing consequences. It's about whether documentary evidence, when it reaches sufficient volume and specificity, can still break through partisan polarization that has made accountability nearly impossible. For years, political scientists have warned that America has entered a post-truth era where partisan identity matters more than facts. The Epstein fallout is testing that thesis. If witness testimony from multiple sources, if phone records, if flight logs, if contemporaneous communications can create sufficient consequences to affect political viability, business relationships, and international standing, it suggests evidence still matters when it becomes overwhelming enough. But if Trump can weather this fallout, if consequences prove temporary, if partisan loyalty ultimately overrides 437 pages of documentary evidence, then we've confirmed that no amount of evidence matters. The next several months will be determinative. Will Republican primary voters choose a different candidate? Will corporate partners maintain their terminations? Will polling continue to show erosion or stabilize and recover? Legal and political experts are describing this as a watershed moment. Lawrence Tribe, constitutional law professor at Harvard, stated that the comprehensive nature of fallout suggests that while political partisanship is powerful, documentary evidence reaching certain thresholds can still break through. Do me a favor and slam that like button because it genuinely helps this video reach more people. Even some conservative commentators acknowledge the historic nature. Rich Lowry, editor of National Review, wrote that regardless of one's views on Trump's policies, the corporate, polling, and international response represents a level of coordinated reputational consequences that any political figure would struggle to overcome. So let's break down what this historic fallout means going forward. First, immediate electoral implications. Trump's path to the Republican nomination, which looked increasingly certain before the document release, is now genuinely uncertain. The double-digit decline in favorability and the significant percentage of Republican voters expressing concern creates an opening for challengers. Second, this creates cascading financial pressure on Trump Organization. When licensing deals terminate, when banks exit relationships, when property values decline, the cumulative effect threatens Trump's business empire in ways that could force asset sales. Trump's business model has always depended on continuous credit access and licensing revenue. Losing both simultaneously creates a liquidity crisis. Third, the international fallout creates permanent diplomatic complications. Even if Trump returns to office, the public criticism from allied governments will make normal diplomatic engagement extraordinarily difficult. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'm genuinely curious to see your perspective. But beyond immediate consequences, this raises fundamental questions about accountability mechanisms in American democracy. For years, critics argued that Trump has faced no real consequences, suggesting traditional accountability systems have broken down. The Epstein fallout is testing whether that assessment is accurate or whether accountability systems simply require evidence to reach certain thresholds before they activate effectively. The evidence in this case appears to have reached that threshold in ways previous controversies did not. The question now is whether the accountability mechanisms that have activated will sustain pressure or whether partisan dynamics will eventually neutralize consequences. According to reporting, Trump's inner circle is deeply divided about how to respond. Some advisors reportedly argue Trump needs to address the evidence substantively. Others maintain that any acknowledgement would be catastrophic and that Trump should continue to categorically deny and attack the evidence. Things reached a critical point when Trump attempted to respond with statements between February 10th and 15th. He attacked the corporations terminating relationships as caving to political pressure. He claimed the polling was rigged. He insisted international criticism was evidence of global conspiracy against him. He continued to deny awareness of Epstein's criminal activities. The statements provided no substantive explanation for documentary evidence. Stay with me. What comes next will completely change how you understand what's at stake. Here's what makes this response strategy catastrophic. When you're facing historic consequences across multiple dimensions, denying reality and attacking everyone raising concerns doesn't stop the cascade. It accelerates it by reinforcing concerns about judgment and credibility that drove the consequences. Multiple crisis management experts noted that the only way to potentially limit fallout of this magnitude is to acknowledge reality and provide substantive explanations. Attacking and denying in the face of 437 pages of court documents makes corporate partners more certain that terminating relationships was correct. This goes far beyond one scandal. This is about whether America maintains functioning accountability systems where evidence that reaches sufficient volume creates consequences that transcend partisan polarization. If 67 name mentions in court documents, if witness testimony from multiple sources, if corroborated phone records and flight logs can create corporate terminations, polling collapse, and international criticism that are durable, it suggests accountability mechanisms still function. But if these consequences prove temporary, if partisan loyalty neutralizes the fallout, then we've confirmed that evidence doesn't matter regardless of volume or specificity. If this blows your mind, hit that like button right now. Here's what we're witnessing: historic fallout across corporate relationships, polling data, international diplomacy, and political dynamics. Documentary evidence more extensive than any previous Trump scandal. consequences that are cascading and accelerating rather than stabilizing. Keep close attention because the fallout continues to develop. More corporations are reviewing their Trump relationships. Additional polling is tracking whether support erosion continues. International allies are preparing contingency plans. Congressional committees are preparing subpoenas. Federal prosecutors are reviewing evidence for potential criminal investigations. Before we go any further, smash that subscribe button so you never miss content like this. Here's where the historic fallout stands. Trump has lost licensing deals worth over $200 million. His national favorability has dropped 11 points in 1 week. Major financial institutions have terminated lending relationships. Allied Democratic governments have publicly questioned his fitness. Republican members of Congress have broken ranks. And polling shows 23% of Republican voters expressing concerns serious enough to affect their support. This isn't just another scandal. This is a comprehensive test of whether accountability mechanisms can overcome partisan polarization when evidence reaches sufficient volume and specificity. What happens in coming months will determine whether witness testimony, phone records, flight logs, and contemporaneous communications showing 67 name mentions create consequences durable enough to affect electoral outcomes. The documentary evidence is now part of permanent public record. The corporate terminations have been formally announced. The polling data shows measurable shifts. The international criticism has been publicly stated. Now we watch whether these consequences compound and intensify or whether they prove to be temporary shocks that partisan dynamics eventually neutralize. The stakes for American democracy have never been clearer. The test of our system's resilience has never been more direct. And the question of whether evidence still matters has never had more consequential implications. Pause for a second and hit that like button if you're finding value in this coverage.